Some American killers don't hunt in cities. They wait on empty roads, by silent barns, behind small-town gas stations where no one's watching. Their murders aren't crimes of passion. They're blueprinted like maintenance jobs. Between 1993 and 2019, 5 men killed across rural America using hardware store tools, fake job offers, and complete control of space and silence. They didn't just take lives, they erased them, and the killers too vanished with nothing but questions left behind. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you want more disturbing serial killer cases like these, don't forget to subscribe, because these cases aren't just unsolved, they were designed to be. He fixed what no one else noticed and left behind what no one could explain. Raymond Kale wasn't on any sex offender list, didn't have a violent history, and never owned a single home in his name. But between 2002 and 2011, 12 women went missing in 3 rural counties spanning southern Iowa and northern Missouri, all within 40 miles of where Raymond's van was last spotted. He wasn't a real contractor, but to the women he targeted, that's exactly what he looked like. Dusty overalls, a clipboard with carbon forms, and a low southern drawl that made him sound older than he was. He'd knock on doors during late mornings, never too early to raise suspicion, never too late to seem intrusive. He told them their landlord had scheduled a routine inspection, or sometimes that he was hired to check the pressure valve in the basement. And he always had the right names: the landlords, the utility companies, even the tenant's dog. Women living alone trusted him. Why wouldn't they? He never forced entry. He never shouted. He waited for them to step aside and say, "Sure, come in." That's when it started. The murders didn't look like murders. At first it looked like runaways or accidents. One woman was reported missing after failing to show up at her teaching job. Her house was clean, her purse still hung on the back of a chair. Another was a part-time vet tech, last seen after texting her co-worker, "Some guy's here to fix the boiler." None of their homes showed signs of struggle, but one oddity kept surfacing: the basements. Every victim lived in a house with unfinished basements, usually concrete floors and exposed beams. And each time, detectives found faint drag marks in the dust, lines running from the utility corner to the base of the stairs, like someone had slowly pulled a body, then cleaned the stairs, but not the dust. Raymond's weapon of choice wasn't a gun, it wasn't even a knife. It was a specialized pipe threader, a 2-foot metal crank with a tightening clamp on the end, designed to wrap around metal pipework and twist. He repurposed it to crush throats, silent, controlled, no blood. The autopsies later revealed cartilage fractures and spinal compression consistent with a lateral crushing motion, not manual strangulation. In 3 cases, the coroner couldn't even confirm time of death due to lack of tissue damage. Raymond left nothing but vacancy, and then he moved the body, not outside, not far, underneath. In one recovered case, the only one where remains were found, the victim's body was hidden inside the false subflooring beneath a pile of insulation boards. She wasn't even discovered until the house was sold years later and a new owner stepped through the floorboard. Raymond was a ghost in paper, no birth certificate, no driver's license. But a neighbor in Lamoni, Iowa, recalled an odd man who lived in a trailer behind a storage yard for a few months in 2006. He'd walk every morning with a toolbox and come back after sunset, never talking, never waving. A contractor ID found in a trash barrel in 2013 matched the name R. Kale. But the photo was dark, the badge fake. The company it belonged to had been out of business since 1999. That same year, a 5th victim disappeared from a town just 10 miles away. Her house was being inspected for wiring faults. Witnesses saw a man in overalls walking toward her porch. Then nothing. She was never seen again. And like the others, the inside of her house was untouched, save for the basement's dust trail. What made Raymond Kale truly disturbing wasn't just how he lured his victims, it was how little he left behind. He never took trophies, he never wrote letters, he never used the same fake company name twice, and despite operating across more than a dozen towns over nearly a decade, no camera ever caught a clean image of his face. The few witness sketches that did exist were wildly inconsistent. Some said he was tall and lanky, others swore he was short and stocky. One elderly neighbor even insisted she saw two men, one who knocked on the door and one who waited by the van. That possibility, investigators later admitted, was never ruled out, but no other individual was ever identified. The only physical clue that connected the murders was a faint blue residue found on several basement door handles and stair railings, later identified as industrial-grade pipe sealant. That compound was only sold in bulk to licensed contractors and hardware suppliers, yet every attempt to trace its distribution came up cold. The name Raymond Kale never appeared in any contractor registry, tax ID database, or residential lease. No one by that name ever held a registered social security number in the US. For all legal purposes, he didn't exist. But his method did. In the one case where remains were eventually uncovered, that of Marlene Stotts, a 34-year-old substitute teacher who disappeared in 2008, the timeline cracked open just enough to suggest Raymond may have stayed longer than previously believed. Her home, like the others, showed no forced entry, but the insulation boards above her body were nailed in place with roofing nails, not the standard interior screws found in that house. And in the crawl space itself, investigators found 5 cigarette butts. They were all smoked halfway and then stamped out against the concrete. DNA testing showed they belonged to the same unknown male. No matches in CODIS, no hits in local jails, just partial profiles, enough to prove consistency, but never enough to issue a warrant. What unnerved detectives even more was that the cigarette brand, Lucky Strike Unfiltered, was not sold in that county. It hadn't been carried by local gas stations since the 1990s. Whoever left them had brought them in, possibly on purpose. A signature that wasn't about pride, but about control. Raymond also seemed to anticipate patrol patterns. In at least 3 separate instances, neighbors reported seeing a dark green Econoline van parked within 1 block of a victim's house, but never overnight. One homeowner whose sister disappeared in 2007 told police that a maintenance guy had visited a week before the disappearance, then returned the morning of. He left before she could open the door. His van had no plates, just a black square where the tag should have been. In another case, a woman said she received a voicemail confirming a repair appointment she had never scheduled. The voice was calm, professional, male. She missed the appointment because she stayed overnight at her boyfriend's cabin. 2 days later, her next-door neighbor vanished. Every time authorities tried to predict where he might strike next, he vanished for months, sometimes years, and then returned 3 towns away. He moved in loops. He never doubled back. And after 2011, the killing stopped altogether. Or so they thought. In 2016, a private well inspector in southern Missouri discovered a sealed crawl space beneath a newly foreclosed farmhouse. Inside were the skeletal remains of a woman bound in copper wire, the same type used in home electrical grounding systems. The remains had no clothing, no ID, no signs of trauma. But beneath the body, embedded in the dirt floor, was a flattened coil of blue pipe sealant tape, the same compound found on stair railings in earlier crime scenes. When investigators reviewed the property records, they discovered something odd. The house had been rented for 3 years by a man named R. King, who paid in cash and left no forwarding address. The landlord said he only saw him once. Quiet man, drove a green van. There was never an arrest. No one ever identified Raymond Kale. Some believe he was an ex-electrician or plumber who learned to bypass background checks. Others think he may have been a former military engineer, trained in logistics, disguise, and movement. One retired homicide detective went on record saying, "If you showed me a clean-cut guy with a clipboard today, I'd still think of him." What remains chilling is the silence. Not a single family ever received a ransom note, confession, or anonymous tip. Not one. The killings weren't about attention. They weren't about hatred. They were about presence, entering a place, controlling it, removing what mattered, and vanishing as if the whole interaction was a failed appointment. There's a theory among behavioral profilers that Raymond didn't stop in 2011. He just got better. He may have moved west, or south, or even started changing his appearance completely. What no one can answer is why the murders stopped leaving dust trails. Either he's gone, or he's finally found homes without basements. Franklin Dwire didn't hunt in alleys, shadows, or forests. He hunted through Craigslist, through room-for-rent ads, through community bulletin boards in sleepy towns where trust was still currency and background checks were considered rude. He called himself Franklin, sometimes Frank, sometimes F. Dwire, and he always showed up with the same soft voice, the same calm smile, the same story. He was recently laid off, had no pets, didn't smoke, and just needed a quiet place to stay while he looked for work. He paid in cash, always the exact amount, sometimes 2 months up front. His references, a few names, disconnected numbers, and one printed offer letter folded neatly in a laminated folder. No one ever followed up, because Franklin didn't choose suspicious people. He chose the kind of landlords who wanted someone quiet, someone invisible, and that's exactly what he gave them for the first few days. Between 1999 and 2012, 7 people, all homeowners who had recently posted small rental listings, went missing from their own properties within the first 6 weeks of renting a room to a man matching Franklin's description. These weren't careless disappearances. They were erasures. Beds remained made, dishes clean, mail piled on counters untouched. In 3 of the homes, police found the keys still in the door from the inside. No forced entry, no blood, no sign of struggle, but no people either. One detective called the scenes too still, as if whoever lived there had simply walked into the next room and dissolved. In almost every case, neighbors remembered seeing a soft-spoken, slightly hunched man moving furniture or taking out trash in the first week after he moved in, always alone, always polite. He smiled, he nodded, sometimes he waved. No one ever saw him arrive with a moving truck. And when he left nothing behind. Not a fingerprint, not a scrap of DNA, not even a trash bag. The only reason police ever connected the dots was because of the carpets. In 4 separate homes, the original owner had upgraded to a new beige shag carpet just months before renting the room. In every scene, the same section, approximately 4 feet by 6 feet, had been cut out, peeled clean to the subfloor, and replaced with a near-identical match. The padding was different. The glue, too. But the visual was seamless unless you knew what to look for. Forensics found faint traces of bleach on the wooden floorboards beneath the patched carpet. But again, no blood, no fluids, just absence. Franklin seemed to know exactly what could be traced and what wouldn't matter. In the single case where they did find a sliver of organic evidence, a partial hair fragment lodged behind a wall outlet, the DNA was too degraded for identification. No roots, no usable profile. Still, the fragment matched mitochondrial DNA from one of the missing owners. It wasn't enough to charge anyone, but it was enough to confirm a pattern. Franklin didn't stay long. He never rented for more than 8 weeks. In some cases, just 4. He didn't bring furniture, just one dark green duffel bag. Inside were the same items every time: a folded tarp, a screwdriver set, duct tape, latex gloves, drain cleaner, 2 pairs of thrift store clothes, and a miniature electric saw with the serial number scratched off. He didn't take photos. He didn't use social media. One neighbor, the only person to interact with him for more than a wave, remembered Franklin helping carry groceries one afternoon. She said he was gentle, maybe 40s, and didn't make much eye contact. But when she offered him an apple as thanks, he declined, smiled tightly, and walked back into the house. That was the last time she saw him. The next week, the homeowner, her neighbor, was reported missing. Police arrived to find the guest room empty, Franklin gone, and all mail labeled "Return to Sender." The last known sighting of Franklin Dwire came from a case in 2012 near Laramie, Wyoming. A widow named Karen Wilcox had posted a simple listing on a church bulletin board. Room for rent, quiet, no pets, Christian home. Franklin showed up the next evening, wearing a windbreaker, glasses, and carrying his signature green duffel bag. He introduced himself as Frank, said he was recently displaced from Colorado Springs due to downsizing, and asked if she was okay with him staying just a few weeks. Wilcox was a kind woman. Her late husband had died the year before. She had no children, no nearby relatives. She said yes. 3 days later, she called a friend and mentioned that her new tenant barely made a sound. By the next week, she stopped answering her phone. On day 12, a Meals on Wheels volunteer knocked and received no response. The door was unlocked. Her purse sat on the kitchen table. Her favorite slippers, always at the foot of her recliner, were gone. But her phone, her keys, and her calendar were still inside. Franklin was nowhere to be found. Police searched the house with cadaver dogs. Nothing. They pulled up the carpets. Spotless. They opened every crawl space. Clean. But something was off about the guest room closet. The baseboard had been pried up and nailed back, slightly crooked. Behind it, they found a section of drywall had been removed, scrubbed, and replaced. There were fine traces of plaster dust in the carpet, too fresh for an old house. One technician noticed an odd smell behind the wall, not decay, not bleach, something chemical. When they broke it open, they found nothing but sawdust, fiberglass, and a small plastic bag containing used latex gloves and a patch of flannel soaked in some kind of cleaning fluid. No blood, no traceable DNA. But again, the scene felt designed to look untouched. Wilcox was never found. Franklin, or Frank, had left no record of employment, no rental applications, no fingerprints on file. The phone number he used to contact her was purchased at a gas station 120 miles away. His name was fake. His ID, untraceable. What made this case the most haunting wasn't what they found. It was what they didn't. Inside Wilcox's desk was a manila folder labeled Emergency Contact Info. Police flipped it open, expecting names of relatives. Instead, they found a printed document titled Franklin Rules. It listed 5 short bullet points, typed in all caps. Don't speak to neighbors. Don't enter rooms without permission. Don't leave trash out. Don't ask about family. If anything happens, bury the file. It was unsigned, but it was paperclipped to a single Polaroid photo. A blurry image of a man standing on the porch in the early morning light, holding a coffee mug. The face wasn't clear, but the build matched witness descriptions. The mug read, "World's Quietest Roommate." Investigators believe Wilcox may have grown suspicious and created the file as a backup plan, but never got to send it. The photo had been taken from inside her living room window, angled through the blinds, which meant she took it in secret and left it in plain sight. The Wilcox case was the last time Franklin's signature pattern appeared. No similar disappearances have been linked since 2012, but his cases weren't dramatic. They were surgical. So clean, in fact, that authorities believe there may be more, dozens, simply filed under missing persons, never flagged as suspicious. His technique was simple: rent a room, study the routine, isolate the subject, then remove them during a moment of perfect stillness, mid-shower, mid-nap, mid-phone call. He never forced anything. He just waited. And when the timing was right, he erased. Today, Franklin Dwire has no arrest warrant because he has no legal name, no biometric data, no digital trail. The only thing investigators agree on is this: he was smart, patient, and terrifyingly invisible. The FBI classified his methods as involuntary erasure via domestic infiltration, but the files have long since gone cold. The green duffel bag, the latex gloves, the identical carpet cuts, they're all patterns now, passed among retired detectives like cautionary tales. And every so often, when a new room for rent case goes quiet, someone mentions his name, not with panic, but with dread. Because Franklin Dwire didn't want headlines. He wanted silence. And for the most part, he got it. Franklin Dwire didn't strike out of rage or compulsion. He moved like mist, unnoticed until the absence became too loud to ignore. Each crime scene he left behind wasn't a cry for attention, but a blueprint of silence. His pattern was precision. His goal was vacancy. And while Dwire's trail faded into stillness, the next man on this list operated within a completely different kind of quiet. Not the still air of empty rooms, but the padded hush of holy places. Places where trust is automatic, where access is absolute, where sound is controlled not by chaos, but by design. On paper, Marshal Trent was every pastor's dream volunteer. Soft-spoken, punctual, and blessed with golden ears, he handled the audio desk at 3 different Baptist churches across northern Mississippi between 1997 and 2013. He dressed plainly: khakis, collared shirts, orthopedic shoes. No wedding ring, no records of higher education, just a certificate in live audio engineering from a community course in Jackson. But what he lacked in charisma, he made up for in availability. He never missed Sunday. He never missed youth nights. And most importantly, he had unrestricted access to sanctuaries after hours, often the only person inside besides the janitor. Church leaders trusted him with the keys, alarm codes, even Wi-Fi passwords. He offered to update the systems, replace old wires, even build custom insulation panels. It made him seem helpful, tech-savvy, invisible. But Marshal Trent was not there to amplify God. He was there to cut the mic when no one was listening. The first body was found in 1999. 15-year-old Sadie Holloway, a soprano in the youth choir at Haven Baptist in Pike County. Her mother dropped her off early for a Saturday practice. The rest of the group showed up at 9:30. Sadie never did. At 9:34, her phone pinged a cell tower near the church office. At 10:12, a deacon found her body behind the fellowship hall's back staircase. No signs of sexual assault, no bruises, just a deep linear indentation across the neck, too thin for rope, no blood, no drag marks, no footprints. The staircase lights had been cut at the circuit panel inside the AV booth. Police labeled it a possible suicide, despite family protest. The church held a vigil. Marshall ran the audio. Over the next 10 years, 4 more deaths followed. All 5 occurred in churches where Marshall was the sound engineer. All 5 were teenage girls, ages 14 to 17, found in non-visible corners of their church properties. In each case, the lights had been disabled. In each case, the surveillance systems had been under repair. And in each case, the audio booth had been recently recalibrated, a task Marshall insisted on doing alone. Authorities never connected the dots. No signs of struggle, no forced entry. And Marshall always had a signed-in record on the building's log sheets. He was just the sound man, helpful, quiet, always working on something technical. But what investigators would later find, after the 6th girl went missing, was that Marshall had been using the AV booth's ceiling to hide more than XLR cables. In 2013, at Grace Mercy Fellowship in Starkville, a new youth pastor named Corey Willis decided to revamp the church's aging soundboard. He climbed into the crawl space above the control booth and found 3 sealed plastic tubs hidden behind the insulation. Inside were labeled Ziploc bags, each containing strands of long hair, clips of fingernails, and small paper tags marked with dates and initials. One bag had SH-2/6/99. Another had AL-7/2204. 5 total, all matching the initials and death dates of the 5 deceased girls. The police were called immediately. Marshall was gone. He hadn't shown up for service that Sunday. His car was found 2 days later in a Walmart parking lot in Dothan, Alabama, wiped clean, keys in the ignition. Surveillance showed him walking away calmly at 8:13 a.m., holding nothing but a small duffel bag and wearing a collared shirt. That was the last confirmed image of him. His house, a small mobile home outside Magee, was filled with cassette tapes, labeled by date, with audio recorded from live services at all 3 churches. One tape, marked Practice Night, September 12, 2007, included an hour of standard choir rehearsal, followed by 20 minutes of what sounded like soft breathing, the creak of a door, and faint whispering. The last 30 seconds were total silence, a click, then the sound of a door closing. The girl on that tape had been declared dead that same night, cause undetermined. Trent's weapon was later believed to be a piano wire embedded into a modified boom microphone arm, something that could be extended silently, used in one motion, and hidden among gear in seconds. He used the sound booth's blackout panels to muffle noise. He used the trust of the church to gain access to unsupervised teens, and he used his deep knowledge of church layouts to know exactly where security cameras couldn't see. But his real tool wasn't the wire, it was routine, choir rehearsals, youth nights, Saturday cleanups, events where one girl might show up early and never be seen again. What makes Marshall Trent so dangerous is not just how he killed, but how many opportunities he had to do it again, and again, and again. Despite the evidence hidden in his crawl space, his case was mishandled from the moment it was discovered. After the plastic bins were reported and the 5 labeled bags were logged into evidence, no arrest was made. There was no active warrant on Trent until 4 full days after he was officially listed as unaccounted for, and by then, he had likely crossed into Louisiana. No security footage ever surfaced showing him purchasing tickets, boarding buses, or withdrawing money. His phone was turned off 11 minutes after he exited that Walmart parking lot in Dothan, Alabama. He never used his bank card again. There was no rental car, no toll pass, no pings. And when the FBI attempted to recover his digital footprint, emails, forum posts, online audio engineering groups, they found only one clue, a bookmarked Craigslist ad from 2012. It was for a church in Boise, Idaho, looking for a volunteer AV specialist comfortable with analog and digital mixers. The message was never sent, but the ad had been viewed 6 times from his home IP address. That church burned down in 2014. The pastor called it electrical failure. No deaths were reported, no suspects questioned. As investigators reconstructed his pattern, the picture darkened. He'd begun at smaller churches, where record-keeping was poor and adult supervision looser. Over time, his targets grew more specific, always females under 18, always involved in music, always early arrivals. One officer noted that in 2 separate incidents, the victims had mentioned to friends they were staying a little after to help Mr. Trent with mic setup. No one thought that was suspicious at the time. Marshall's method was built on familiarity. He made the AV booth a home, covered in wires, sheet music, spare microphones, and candy bowls for the kids. He'd invite teens up to show them how the mixer worked. He let them wear the headset. Some of them called him Mr. M. or Sound Dad. But it was all staging. His audio cables were meticulously color-coded. The racks were locked when he wasn't present, and the one mic stand he always kept off to the side was never used in live services. Forensics later found minute traces of blood inside its tightening knob, so small they had to use UV dye just to extract a partial DNA match. The blood belonged to a girl from a church 300 miles away. Her death had been ruled medical. Her name was never released publicly. In one of the most disturbing discoveries, a box of cassette tapes found in his home was labeled Practice Vault. Each tape contained choir rehearsals from different churches, but all of them ended with dead air, no fade, no click, just a flat hum. Investigators believe he recorded ambient room noise after every murder, likely to listen for signs of interruption or to study his own pacing. In one recording, analysts noted a faint tapping sound recurring every 8 seconds for 3 minutes straight, possibly a watch ticking or a finger tapping on a pew. Marshall was never recorded speaking, never heard on his own tapes, just silence and breathing. Despite overwhelming circumstantial evidence, the case was never formally tried. No bodies were exhumed. None of the churches involved released public statements linking Trent to the deaths. In fact, 2 of the congregations denied ever employing him, despite service rosters proving otherwise. The Starkville Church quietly removed his name from all volunteer documentation, and when CBS requested comment in 2018, the current pastor said, "We are a house of healing, not history." Today, Marshall, the church sound man. Trent remains one of the only suspected serial killers in Mississippi history never issued a national warrant. Some say it's shame, others say it's fear. But the reality is worse. Churches close ranks, choirs move on, audio gets recycled, and Marshall was always more signal than noise, always waiting near the back wall, just out of frame. The FBI's last official communication on Trent was in 2016, when a tip came in from Wichita, Kansas. A church elder claimed their new tech volunteer looked familiar and that he had a strange obsession with cables. When agents arrived, the man was gone. No name on file, no car in the lot. Just a sticky note left on the AV desk that read, "Mic 4 hums at 3.7K, fix it." The note was signed M. Authorities believe Trent is still alive, possibly under a new identity, and still attending or volunteering in church communities with low oversight. The pattern isn't over, it's paused. And that's the horror. He didn't need notoriety, just access, just routine, just a little time alone in the booth before the lights come on. While Marshall Trent slipped into the shadows of sanctuaries, another man built his hunting grounds under the soft green glow of something most people never notice: exit signs. For some, they show the way out. For Philip Kesler, they showed the way in. Philip Kesler didn't stalk people in alleys or drag them into vans. He simply waited for them to come to him. His strategy was so minimalist, so unassuming, that for nearly a decade, no one considered the pattern could be intentional. All 5 of his known kills happened in public access buildings, malls, public libraries, DMV offices. Once, even a convention center during a home improvement expo. But what made these spaces lethal was the one detail they all shared: remote emergency exits. Kesler used floor plans like blueprints. He would study fire inspection diagrams posted near entrances, noting which exits opened to alleys, parking structures, or loading docks. He preferred buildings with outdated security systems, especially ones with manual latches instead of alarms. And most of all, he watched for routine. Employees who slipped out for smoke breaks, maintenance workers who left doors propped with bricks, event volunteers who used back corridors to grab bottled water. Philip memorized it all. He blended in by looking like no one. Tan windbreaker, ID badge on a lanyard, usually fake, and always carrying a clipboard. That clipboard gave him power. People assumed he belonged. They held doors open for him. No one questioned the guy with paperwork. His first confirmed victim was a college freshman named Carly Hensley, age 19, who vanished during a theater rehearsal at a civic arts center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She had texted her roommate, "Running lines WJ BARB," but J was never identified. Security footage later showed Carly exiting through the back emergency door during a break, the same door known for its broken latch. She wasn't seen again. 2 weeks later, her shoe was found in a dumpster behind a closed-down mattress store 11 miles away. But the most telling clue came a year later, when a sanitation worker found a disposable coffee cup tucked under a stairwell near the same arts center. The lid had a name scrawled in black marker, Phil. It was partially melted and the ink smudged, but forensics revealed trace DNA that matched Carly's skin cells. Investigators believe Kesler may have used the cup to gain her trust, perhaps pretending to offer help or rehearsing lines with her. He likely exited with her through the same unmonitored hallway and loaded her into a vehicle waiting in the alley. There were no screams, no struggle, just timing and exit signs. As the years passed, so did his adaptability. Kesler evolved with building layouts. He downloaded architectural plans using fake contractor accounts and, in one case, posed as a freelance electrician to gain access to maintenance areas. In 2011, a 42-year-old woman named Denise Halford disappeared from a DMV center in Amarillo, Texas. She had entered for a license renewal and was last seen walking toward the restroom hallway, which Kesler had likely rigged ahead of time. When police checked camera feeds, they discovered a 3-minute blackout window. During that gap, an exit door in the back office was propped open. Employees assumed it was ventilation, but Denise never came back. Her purse and phone were found inside the DMV, untouched. Witnesses reported seeing a man with a clipboard walking into the back corridor around the same time, but again, no one challenged him. They thought he was state tech support. He wasn't. Kesler's preferred weapon was simplicity itself, a utility tool. Not a large knife, not a firearm, just a folding multi-tool with a flathead screwdriver and pliers. Medical examiners would later say that puncture wounds on 2 recovered bodies matched a tapered edge consistent with a flathead blade. And while the wounds weren't immediately fatal, they were placed with alarming anatomical precision, targeting arteries behind the knee and at the base of the neck. These were not chaotic attacks. They were executed by someone who had studied emergency medicine or at least human anatomy. None of the wounds were defensive. Victims likely didn't see it coming. Investigators believe he waited until his target was isolated in a narrow hallway, then struck quickly, wrapping a zip tie around the wrists and lifting the body in a fireman's carry. How he transported them afterward remains unknown, but it's suspected he used stolen maintenance carts or janitorial bins, blending into the background noise of everyday operations. Philip Kesler didn't live in the buildings he hunted in. He traveled between them using a network of rented RVs, often under different aliases. DMV records uncovered 14 separate registrations linked to burner addresses, all matching vehicles used near his crime scenes. He wasn't a drifter in the classic sense. He was mobile infrastructure. His entire kill chain operated within zones of assumed trust. The exit sign was merely the start. From there, it was routine. Get in, wait, select, exit, and disappear. Philip Kesler's downfall wasn't a single mistake. It was almost a confession, but so carefully buried in red tape that it slipped through unnoticed for 4 more years. In 2015, a 28-year-old school counselor named Jonah Reeves went missing during a weekend convention in Salt Lake City. The event, hosted at a mid-sized exhibition hall, had more than 400 attendees, and the surveillance footage from that weekend stretched over 120 hours. Jonah had been volunteering at the registration desk, At 3:14 p.m., he left his booth to check something in the storage wing. Witnesses recall seeing him talking to a man in a khaki jacket and an ID badge that said, "Event Safety, Facilities." He was holding a clipboard. The same man had been seen earlier speaking with stage techs, asking about extension cords. Jonah was never seen again. Investigators reviewed the tapes and found a camera in the service hallway that had been tampered with. The feed flickered, then cut out for 7 minutes. At 3:19 p.m., a side exit door near the electrical closet was triggered. A pressure sensor detected the weight of 2 individuals. When footage resumed, both were gone. But this time, Kesler left something behind. Not a body, not blood, but a file. 4 months after the convention, building staff did a routine digital cleanup and discovered an unregistered USB drive plugged into the master terminal of the facility's security console. Inside were 3 floor plans. One of the files had been altered, emergency exit routes were rerouted, labels were renamed, and the Camera 11 tag was changed to Camera 13, a designation that didn't exist. Someone had overwritten the map and re-uploaded it during the event. That someone had administrative access. When authorities traced the last login session, it pinged a masked IP from a prepaid mobile hotspot purchased at a gas station in Carson City, Nevada, over 500 miles away. By the time agents visited the location, it had already shut down. The building was empty. All they found was a box of expired Ethernet cables and a receipt for 10 gallons of unleaded. The name on the card, P. Keller. Despite the obvious link, no fingerprint match was ever made. Kesler never left physical evidence, no hair, no fibers, no DNA. The few fragments collected from scene to scene, a drop of oil on a linoleum floor, a torn scrap of a paper visitor badge, a partial shoe print in an unlit hallway, were never enough. But investigators eventually began to stitch a psychological footprint. Kesler chose structures, not victims. His obsession wasn't rage, lust, or power in the conventional sense. It was layout, geometry. He hunted like an engineer. Each attack followed the same template: identify access, isolate the target, and retreat without triggering suspicion. This consistency became his only weakness. Analysts at Quantico's behavioral unit built a model showing his preference for medium-capacity, municipal-owned structures with a minimum of 3 service exits. He avoided newer buildings with electronic locks and stayed clear of venues with over 1,000 attendees. The pattern suggested someone who didn't thrive in chaos. He required predictability. It was his ritual. And it was that need for control that nearly got him caught. In late 2016, a joint task force began monitoring regional building permits in 7 states, cross-referencing janitorial contracts and vendor access logs. They set up bait operations in select buildings with vulnerabilities mimicking his preferred conditions: outdated blueprints, minimal security, and predictable foot traffic. For 6 months, nothing happened. But in July 2017, a city hall in Colorado Springs reported a break-in during an after-hours zoning meeting. Nothing was stolen, no alarms were triggered, but a utility closet door was left ajar. Inside, police found a clipboard wedged behind a water heater. On it were 5 names, all employees in the building that night, and beside each name, one of 3 handwritten codes: safe, stall, or exit. The handwriting matched the scrawl on the old coffee cup from the Carly Hensley case in Tulsa. For the first time, law enforcement had a link between crime scenes across states. They tried to trace the pen used, a generic ballpoint sold in 24 packs, but it was too common to trace. Still, it confirmed something vital. Kesler was still active and still refining his process. Then, everything stopped. No further sightings, no new disappearances under his known M.O. Some theorized he'd moved overseas, others believed he died. But a quiet few in the task force thought something else. That Kesler had succeeded in creating a space so invisible, so removed from suspicion, that he no longer needed to flee. Maybe he had found a role he could live in permanently: a maintenance supervisor, a late-night security tech, an event coordinator in some anonymous Midwestern town. He wouldn't need to run anymore if he became the system. There was no body, no final message, no confession or close call. Just a trail of open doors, flickering lights, and one clipboard too many. Today, Philip the exit sign Kesler remains on multiple missing persons and BOLO databases. His face is unknown. His kills may not even be done. What investigators agree on is simple. As long as buildings have side exits and people assume the man with a clipboard belongs, Kesler might still be inside, waiting for someone to follow the sign that says exit, not realizing it leads directly into his domain. 5 killers, 5 blueprints for murder, and yet not one of them left behind a confession, a clear motive, or a trail clean enough to follow for long. They didn't crave media chaos or bloodied theatrics. They craved invisibility, routine jobs, silent neighborhoods, predictable victims. But while most of them chose strangers and patterns, our final subject did something even darker. He turned the familiar into a trap. He didn't hunt unknowns. He killed the people who trusted him most. Owen Bellamy never raised his voice, not when he was fired, not when his fiancée left, not when his father cut him off. He was the kind of man who carried quiet like a second skin, reserved, polite, unshakable. On paper, he was forgettable, worked midnights at a logistics warehouse in rural Ohio, drove an aging Buick, paid rent in cash, and spent weekends volunteering with local church groups. But that same calm presence masked something much darker, a rage that didn't erupt but fermented, and when it finally moved, it didn't scream. It calculated. Between 2009 and 2016, 3 women disappeared, all within Owen's orbit. All of them were women who had offered him trust. A roommate who once shared rent during a bad breakup, a supervisor who helped him get rehired after disciplinary suspension, and a former girlfriend who'd let him stay a few nights after his car broke down. At first, their disappearances were treated separately, one labeled a runaway, one misfiled under a domestic dispute, and the last marked as voluntary absence due to the woman's prior divorce filing. But later, much later, it became clear the women had something else in common. All of them were last seen after visiting Owen Bellamy, and none of them ever made it home. Bellamy didn't need to lure strangers. He waited for familiar voices, people who already believed in his stability. Once inside his orbit, his approach was disarmingly subtle. He offered to help carry groceries, fixed cars, listen to life updates without judgment. His weapon of choice wasn't flashy, it was suffocation. Not with ropes or cords, but with layered sheets of plastic wrap, duct tape, and methodical force applied in confined spaces like closets and vehicle trunks. In each case, he disabled his victims with prescription sedatives stolen from warehouse medical kits. He'd crush the pills into orange juice, tea, or soda. None of them knew they were slipping, not until they couldn't scream. And Owen didn't panic. He wrapped them slowly, like packing fragile items, binding joints and mouths with mechanical precision. No blood, no scratches, just containment. Once they were gone, he used a technique that would only be discovered years later, dissolving teeth in acid and burning remaining soft tissue using accelerants inside metal drums, items purchased legally at hardware supply stores. What bones survived were buried under manufactured concrete mix, laid over backlot storage units he had access to via temp jobs. What made Bellamy so terrifying wasn't just how clean his crimes were. It was how long it took to even recognize them as connected. By the time the third disappearance raised suspicions, Bellamy had moved again, changed cars again, picked up new warehouse shifts again. and the one message he left behind, scrawled under the lid of an old toolbox, simply read, "Fall for me once." It wasn't until a routine eviction in 2017 that police got their first real lead. A landlord clearing out an unpaid storage unit in Kentucky, leased under a false name, stumbled upon several industrial drums, sealed shut with concrete. Inside one of them were remnants of scorched bone fragments, fused jewelry parts, and melted synthetic fibers that, after months of forensic work, were linked to one of the missing women from Ohio. The drums were registered to an alias tied to a prepaid debit card, which in turn had been refilled from a payroll account used by a logistics firm in 3 other states. That's when Owen Bellamy's name returned, not in a headline, not in a suspect file, but buried in an old temp agency spreadsheet. He had worked a 4-week shift at a warehouse 2 blocks from that unit, 3 years prior. But when authorities attempted to track him, they ran into a labyrinth. No current employment records, no active bank accounts. His last known address, a trailer park lot in Indiana, had burned down a year earlier, ruled accidental. What few personal effects were found there included a melted ID badge, a scorched metal lunchbox, and an empty prescription bottle that had been bleached inside. No fingerprints, no witness reports, and no trace of Owen Bellamy. What puzzled investigators the most wasn't that Bellamy had gone off-grid. It was how long he'd been preparing for it. Analysis of receipts and hardware purchases indicated he'd been stockpiling items for years, not just disposal tools, but identity replacement materials, burner phones, prepaid cards, blank employment applications, even textbooks on dental and fingerprint forensics. Interviews with former co-workers revealed nothing unusual. Bellamy was described as punctual, distant, occasionally helpful, and rarely social. One woman remembered he liked Sudoku puzzles. Another said he always kept his work gloves sealed in Ziplocs. That was it. What investigators began to piece together was a portrait of someone who had practiced erasure as a lifestyle, not just covering his crimes, but removing anything that could define him at all. No social media, no family contacts, no recurring doctor visits, no photographs. In one chilling twist, authorities found a notebook buried near the foundation of a demolished farmhouse he once squatted in. Inside were names, dates, chemical formulas, instructions for hiding odors using airtight insulation methods. But there were also pages torn out, pages numbered 45 to 61. The gap led agents to believe at least 2 more victims existed, possibly never reported missing. The last known image of Owen Bellamy was captured in 2016 on a gas station camera in rural Nebraska. He wore a navy hoodie, carried a worn backpack, and was looking straight into the lens. Forensics experts say there was no fear in his eyes, just patience, as if he knew it would be the last time anyone saw him, and he wanted the camera to remember. To this day, Owen Bellamy remains at large. No sightings, no further evidence. But local law enforcement still receives occasional tips, reports of a soft-spoken man who volunteers at roadside shelters, who never gives his last name and always declines photographs. Every tip fades. Every file stays open. Because Bellamy didn't kill for fame. He killed for power and perfected the art of slipping out of view the moment you turned to look. 5 names, 5 methods, 5 unfinished files still buried in the cold case vaults of America. They didn't want chaos. They wanted patterns, silence, and distance. But every one of them left behind a mark so clean it looked accidental, until it happened again, and again, and again. Somewhere out there, someone still knows what really happened, and someone else might already be planning the next vanishing act.